Lads, if you want to intimidate people, walk down the street with your palms out like this.
Just full anatomical position.
Yeah, just walk at people like that and didn't even look at them in the face. Welcome back to Seek Strength, and more importantly, welcome back to Seekistan, coming at you live from St. Petersburg. Today we're doing an exercise on how to decide or how to decipher if an exercise is fucking dumb. So we see a huge amount of this, and Instagram is the most fucking just ridiculous culprit for this kind of shit. And I'm really talking about for people here. There's a little bit of weightlifting too. There's certain schmeng weightlifting Instagram account which posts stuff like this sometimes. But we see a huge amount of this in our kind of real athletes, people we talk about, so field sports, track and field, our MMA fighters, combat sports athletes, stuff like that. We see a huge amount of these exercises being pushed. And we want to give you some tools, so when you look at them, how can you decipher if you're like, oh, that might be a novel exercise, or is that a fucking dumb exercise, which is terrible? And we're going to give you some cues, and we're going to run through some of those. The first one is an exercise. If you see an exercise and it looks like it has no form of meaningful progression, that is the first place to look, where you go, fuck, this does not seem like it's useful, because how can I use this? How can I progress with this?
Yeah, I think that's like the slamming sledgehammers into things. Functional movement. Anything that talks about primal movement.
Yeah.
All of these, like...
If you have a barbell and a gymnastic ring and resistance band in the same exercise,
yeah,
it's a good place to start.
Yeah, like there's a reason the barbell has been around for hundreds of years and it's still around, you know. It's utterly loadable. It's loadable in tiny increments. Barbells here are the exact same as barbells in Dublin. Barbells in Dublin are the exact same as barbells in Tokyo, you know. Everything is the same.
Well,
we can add tiny amounts of weight.
Barbells in Tokyo are probably better. Just better quality.
Yeah, well, but if you barbells made in Tokyo,
Yeah.
If you can add tiny amounts of weight or take away tiny amounts of weight, if you can start at a level that is utterly achievable for almost everyone, right? So 15 kilo bar, 20 kilo bar, almost anyone can squat it, deadlift it, pick it up off the ground without risk of being injured. These are what you really need to look for. When you see those kind of like snake crawl into praying mantis lunge, and you're trying to see like, how the fuck am I going to load this? Do I have to eat 4 kilos of lead shot to try and make my stomach heavier so I can then make that more difficult? Is that an appropriate loading system? Well, it probably isn't. It's probably very cumbersome. Most of the time, it's very clear if something's going to be easily progressible or not. If I go to a different gym, will I be able to do the same movements and make progress and add or take away? So like progression or regression are the same things along the same scale. But is it something that I can say, like, okay, if I give this to 100 athletes, can 100 athletes do it? Can 100 athletes make it 10% more difficult, 10% less difficult? And then can they progress that over the course of 8 months, 8 years? The other thing of like why this is so important is progression is the basis for all progress in training. Every single thing you do in training is about starting off fairly light, building some capacity at that level of intensity. We then increase intensity, or we increase volume, and then we progress on from there. Through that kind of wave line of gradually increasing, you start here, you do something that's quite difficult, you obviously go down, then through recovery you'll super compensate and go on. If we constantly keep doing that same thing, so if we keep doing the battle ropes, right, every week, and you're not progressing battle ropes in a meaningful way, then you'll start here, you'll obviously go down because you'll have partially injured yourself, you'll recover, then there'll be some sort of super compensation, you'll just go down the same amount the next time, you'll recover, and you're never using that super compensation, you're never actually getting yourself any further, because you're not making something more voluminous, more intense, or in general you're not progressing anything from session to session.
This kind of leads us on then. So if we look at something that doesn't really make sense, and you're like, how could I meaningfully program this? How could I plan out? How can I set goals for this? This leads us on to something, if it's vastly different than what's been used with successful athletes from the grassroots level all the way up to elite level for a long period of time. If it's something that looks so fucking crazy, it's so hugely different to what we know works very, very well, that's probably another good place. That's the next good place to start with deciding if something's probably a stupid exercise. If something is so so fucking out there that you're like, this just makes no sense. If this looks totally different, and you're not really sure, if they sell it to you in an overly verbose way, very, very complicated language, if they can't give you a good reason and show other examples of it working, it's probably not going to work. And why? Because the human body hasn't really changed that much in the last hundreds of years, couple of thousand years. It hasn't really changed a huge amount. Certainly not in the history of modern sports. Say the first modern Olympics was like 1896 or something like that. Not a lot has changed since then, and not a lot that needs to change, and that's a good thing. That's a good thing for you and I. We're not trying to say, oh, we shouldn't try to progress, we shouldn't try to look for new things. We're just saying this is a better way for you and I to train our athletes, and for you to train yourself, is doing things that we know work. There's no reason that these things won't work for you as well. If we know they work for us, that's a great thing. To have a basis in the knowledge of something that works really well, it's great to have that building. We don't need to be fucking renovating our dictionary of exercises every year. We don't need to be selling ourselves in a different way. We just need to be applying what works. You need to do it, put that hard work in, and then get your results. There's no reason we need to reinvent everything. There's no need to be new exercises, because we know these work very well. It needs to be done, and then you go play your sport and get better at your sports. This primarily comes about from coaches trying to sell themselves from a different angle. Now, there is some people out there, I'm sure, who are genuinely interested in progressing the exercises people use in S&C, for example, and they're looking for new things that work. But we've a great idea of what works very well for S&C for athletes, and a lot of that just looks like the very, very basic stuff you see in a lot of our programs, and you see a lot of top athletes who train smart use as well. So if something looks just fucking mental, it's like, I can remember one that always sticks out in my head when I think of this is a dude was making an exercise for archery. So he'd lay horizontal with the floor, his legs from about his ankle below were on top of a box. He lay horizontal or parallel with the floor, rings were hanging down, he'd one arm holding the rings and the other had a resistance band here, and he was pulling this back as a form of sport specific exercise for archery. If things look like that, I'm sure, I'd love to know if any of you have seen that exercise. You definitely know who that Instagram account is, but that's the kind of thing that sticks out in my head where I'm like, why are we doing this? Why is this being done? You know?
Yeah, that brings us on nicely to another point of like, if something sells itself as making it so much more difficult, like, oh, you think your squats were good? Wait until you do squats standing on a fucking blow up mattress. Wait till you see how difficult this is, right? And stability and instability stuff is a real culprit in this case, but also things like the overuse of bands and chains in a not really kind of nuanced way where you're just slapping them on the bar because they make it more difficult. All of these things fall into the category of like, if something just makes something arbitrarily more difficult, is it really that valuable? And a lot of the time it's just BS, you know. We've seen people doing mad things, particularly in the areas of like plyometrics and stability training, where you'll get somebody so they're standing on a box, they'll jump laterally off the box, they'll land on one leg, and they might be doing something with a med ball where they're kind of doing an anti-rotation piece again.
I can see it now.
And one of my favourite quotes from a former coach of mine is, what are these expletives doing standing and jumping on my seat? Which was a plyometric spot, but it was actually his seat. And he said they look like they're trying to shake sand out of their vaginas. And that's kind of what like a lot of these really weird, feel so much more difficult exercises are doing, you know. A lot of the time the people who are coming up with them aren't actually able to do a requisite amount of weight or speed or power or intensity that would make the exercise actually valuable to people. So you'll see people who probably don't have a heavy enough squat to be doing kind of impressive squats on their own. They'll start putting bands with kettlebells on either side of the barbell, or you'll see people doing weird things with a jerk where they'll start putting plates all the way on the outside and they're trying to train the whip or something like that. Like Garth has mentioned this twice now already, and we know exactly what works. Almost everything that comes along in strength and conditioning, most of what you're doing in your training, most of what we do in our training, most of what's in all of our programs has been around since the 40s. You know, like there really isn't anything that new, and you don't need to look for it that much. I like new, shiny, fandangled things as much as anyone. That's why I have no money in my bank account and I walk around with coins in my pocket. But really, in the case of strength and conditioning, you have a very small, finite amount of time and training load that you're going to be able to fuck around with before it's all gone. You know, like you can't ride that train hard forever. Some people ride it a small bit longer and harder than others, but if you want to get the most out of your kind of athletic prowess, just stick to the well-worn road that's gotten all the world champions to where they are. It's gotten all the world record holders to where they are. You don't need to be doing some sort of weird banded Balsu ball squat stroke RDL good morning.
The next thing to look at, and this is definitely one of the biggest red flags if you're looking for a relationship with a coach, is a massive push towards sport-specific movements in the gym. So looking to recreate your sport in a gym. If someone does that to you, if you see someone pushing for that, if someone tells you to do this, that's a massive red flag. Because from what we know of S&C and what we know to be working, is that S&C training is general. It makes athletes generally prepared for their sport. So if the case was that you could get better at your sport in the gym, we would just see, basically we'd see weightlifters, powerlifters and strongmen be able to go dedicate or destroy any sport if it was, because they would have the capacity to do that and recreate it in the gym. If we could really see that. So what we do see though is we see from weightlifters and we see some kind of, powerlifters, gymnasts, a lot of these, they have general preparation done in their training, and then they have the ability to quickly adapt to that new sport after they spend the time practicing that sport and transferring those skills. So, and what we see in the gym, what we know to be true, is S&C is general. It generally prepares an athlete. A lot of athletes, when we talk about this with MMA athletes as well, a lot of our athletes' S&C looks quite similar. Now there is certainly some nuances, some different areas that you need to focus on a little bit more, a little bit less. But a lot of that stuff looks like strength training, conditioning training, and a lot of plyometric training depending on the athlete. If you see someone trying to recreate your sport in the gym, it's almost certainly a huge red flag, because we know that these exercises fit some of that prior criteria. They will probably look ridiculous. They'll have unmeaningful forms of progression. They'll try use some form of instability training to recreate stability. A great example of this would be a recent meta-analysis came out on the use of weighted implements in training for sport-specific skills. So that would be like an overweighted baseball bat. It would be like weighted punches. And the overwhelming results and the conclusion from those kind of meta-analysis is that they actually detrimentally impact your skills. So if we see someone trying to recreate your sport-specific movement in the gym, if they're giving you a weighted bat, or they're trying to recreate archery, elastic bands and gymnasts, all that's doing is negatively impacting your sport-specific skill. You're reinforcing poor motor patterns for that skill, and you're almost certainly not getting a meaningful training effect from that skill, which is just terrible. So watch out for that. That's a really important one. You'll see all the best general S&C people do in the gym for the best athletes is all just pretty basic general stuff.
The last thing then moves on from kind of like a hyper sport specific claim to hyper specific claims of their kind of effect they'll have in the body, right? And the funny thing is, like, people have gotten this in the last 10 years or so, right? They've gotten it that you can't lose just fat from your stomach. Or sorry, I say people have gotten it. Hopefully the people who are watching this channel will understand. You can't be site specific with your adipose loss, right? But we'll still believe claims of like, oh, this will get you a shift in greater amount of type 2 fibers, or like this will get you to whatever, they'll really zone in on one thing. Like we saw the thing Zach was talking about the other day with like where someone was talking about flushing their lymph system.
Oh, yeah.
And you losing weight because of it, you'll see it about cellulite stuff. Obviously you'll see it about fat, you'll see it about abs and gaining abs, you'll see it about becoming faster, you'll see it about becoming stronger, you'll see it about becoming more ripped, and having less like adipose tissue under your skin. If anything claims to be that hyper specific, nothing works that well in strength and conditioning. Nothing works that well in terms of any sort of organic product, compound, thing, anything. The only thing that would ever work that specifically is weed killer, like path clear, works very, very well on grass, right? And works very, very well on weeds. But anything else, when you're trying to manipulate an organic compound or an organic being, nothing is that specific.
Apparently there's growth hormone for specific to fast twitch fibers. So there's weed killer and growth hormone. So
okay, weed killer and growth hormone that's specific for fast twitch fibers only are the only things that are going to work this well, right? There's multiple kind of things that happen through training, like bilateral transfer. If I break my left arm and I continue to train my right arm, I'll get less atrophy in my left arm. If I'm doing leg presses on just my right leg, my left leg press gets better. If I start inducing a state of being where I am inducing leg hypertrophy, so I'm doing loads of quad extensions 3 to 4 times a week, I'm in a calorie surplus, well, guess what happens, Garth? My upper body will get bigger and stronger too. Nothing is that specific, and anytime we see kind of hyper-specific claims from coaches, from programs, anything like that, you just need to be wary of it. It's like the Road to Anywhere back squat program. I guarantee you people will make increases on their deadlifts while they're doing it.
Yeah.
Or like after it. It just happens. If you put 20 kilos on your back squat, of course you're going to put some weight onto your deadlift. It just happens. Nothing to do with anything living will ever be so perfect as growth hormone that's specific to fast twitch fibers and weed killer. That's about it.
So if you see someone on Instagram saying this will massively increase your 40-yard dash or your ability to dunk from just this one exercise, then there's a huge chance it's a load of bollocks. So just be careful, watch out for it. I know a lot of you guys, or regular viewers, will know this stuff is stupid, but it's important to have this kind of arsenal in your head. And sometimes it's not always clear, because we do see a lot of people falling to the strap from certain coaches, primarily on Instagram, where we see a lot of this movements, and we saw a lot of these kind of like true sports, real sports transfer SEC.
Real sports coach.
Yeah, like all this kind of stuff, and they like aggressively defend it. If it's very different to what everyone else is doing, it's probably a bad sign in general, and that might be taken in a way where you're like, oh, you need to be an innovator, you need to be a original thinker, and we've touched on that kind of stuff before. But just be careful, use your best thought process, run through this checklist in your head. If it matches up, now there is some good exercise out there that might be nice little additions to your S&C training, especially for all our athletes, not really for our weightlifters and powerlifters, but for our other athletes here watching. There might be some good things out there, but just run through this checklist and filter in your head and see if it matches up. Go on. Sorry.
That's like the PS piece on the end of this. You know, new stuff does come along every so often that is quite useful. Mm-hmm. You saw it with the reverse hyper. Like there's stuff that has been invented in the last 20 years, which is now readily available to a lot of people, that are very, very valuable.
Like there's a great example. So we did a force velocity episode on swimming, and so we've wondered a lot about post-activation potentiation. And we were talking about, will it be actually useful in sports, and is it useful in training? We saw in a study the swimmers used the band-resisted bodyweight squats with a band, and they're using it as post-activation, and their start time did get faster from the blocks. So stuff does come along that's new, that might seem a little bit out there, but ends up being very, very useful. You'll probably hear about it if it's useful. It will make its way around, because word of mouth does transfer well with that.
It won't be like an Instagram reel, or it won't be on TikTok. Thanks very much for watching.